You're listening to an archived Cabral Concept podcast. After listening to this show, check out the most up-to-date podcasts available at stephencabral.com/podcasts or search directly on iTunes. And now, welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Cabral Concept. Great to have you with me here today on this Total Wellness Tuesday. We're going to shift the topic back to adrenal fatigue. This is obviously a topic near and dear to my heart with someone that suffered from Addison's disease for many, many years. But the interesting thing about adrenal fatigue and fatigue in general is that everyone seems to experience it, at least that I've seen in my practice, in a multitude of different ways. So although there will be some overlap in terms of symptoms, I've actually seen different people with the same type of HPA-based dysfunction, which we'll talk about what that means, and adrenal fatigue come about or present themselves with different symptoms. This is why it's so important that as a practitioner or someone that's that kind of the head of your household in terms of taking care of everybody in terms of their health, that you know what to look for. So today what I want to come to you with is the 7, I would say, early warning signs of oncoming adrenal fatigue. So this means that it's starting to catch up with you, that whatever lifestyle you're living or the toxic substances that you've been exposed to are starting to present themselves in your life. So what I would like to do right now is share with you a lot of the symptoms, not the diagnosis, but the actual symptoms that your body is becoming more run down. So as I go through this list, do understand that you'll experience some, but maybe not all. Or ideally, the goal is that you're not experiencing any of these, right? So when I look at these now, I say, okay, I'm not experiencing any of these at all. But previously, I experienced all of them. And that's because when you do eventually get into what's called adrenal fatigue or HPA Axis Dysfunction, or at its very, very lowest, which not a lot of people ever get there, but it's called Addison's disease, where it's an actual clinical diagnosis of your body no longer producing cortisol. And you ask yourself, well, why might that matter? Well, cortisol isn't the bad guy. Too much of it certainly is because it can burn out brain cells and it can overstimulate the nervous system, and it can absolutely lower the immune system. But we need some. It's like everything that we look at in this world. It's all about balance. It's never about moderation. It's never about just the inflammation, all those different things. It's always about balance. What I strive for in my practice and in my teaching is to help people realize that the body will take care of itself if it's not overwhelmed with too many toxicities or underwhelmed with not enough nutrients. So our body is actually, what we should strive for is simply working on the different systems of the body. So the problem is that a lot of times, even in natural medicine, we go after all the fun little data points on labs, which, believe me, nobody believes in labs more than I do, that's for sure. But a lot of times, functional medicine practitioners will get carried away with running obscure labs. Now, I understand why they're doing it. They're trying to help their patients to find these little things that they can work on, right? Because they can't find the big overall scope. They can't look at the underlying systems because they haven't been taught that. So they start to go after the very small specific things that they can then say, okay, let me give you a little bit more of this and a little bit more of this. What I'm looking to teach you that I really want you to understand is that the body will be perfectly fine. You'll be able to get well, lose the weight, and live a long, healthy life if the body can maintain its internal systems. Well, what are those systems? Well, one of them that we're going to talk about today is the nervous system, right? Because the nervous system is so important. We talk about it in terms of the endo-immune system. And I spoke about that a little bit inside of the Rain Barrel Effect, my book. And I spoke about it previously on the Cabral Concept as well. And you can just go back and you can listen to those previous podcasts. So, one of the ways that I talked about this is the nervous system is actually what challenges your hormones. Now, what happens is in the short term, it ramps up the adrenal-based hormones. That simply means it ramps up your adrenaline and it's going to ramp up your cortisol, right? So your norepinephrine, your catecholamines, that means it's going to get you revved up. And again, I've spoken about that in depth on previous shows. And your cortisol, which is going to allow you to get into that fight or flight. Now, that's a good thing when you're under stress, but we don't want to be chronically stressed. And even just last week in episode 1033, I spoke about how stress causes disease, and I actually broke it down for you and showed how that happened, because a lot of people say it, but in conventional medicine, like, oh, I don't really believe it. But when you break it down and you actually show the pathophysiology of the body, you show the science of how stress does the digestive system, it does this to the nervous system, it does this to the brain, then people can begin to understand it. And doctors, again, from their conventional medicine background, will then be able to say, okay, yes, I remember learning that. Okay, and that does make sense. So let me do work on stress. Well, stress is obviously part of our lifestyle. But what happens is when we ramp up adrenal-based stress, it lowers in the long term our immunity with DHEA. We'll talk about that in a moment. It lowers testosterone. We'll talk about what happens with that in a moment, and same with progesterone. So we have to be really careful when we're talking about adrenal-based stress, because a lot of us love the stress. We love getting these stressful situations because what happens is it makes us feel alive for a period of time, right? It ramps us up from an overwhelmed, maybe underwhelming life. So what we're looking at is we love these little bits of stress and they make us feel alive. But the problem is, in the long term, they absolutely can and will burn us out. So let's talk about some of those early warning signs right now. And if you're experiencing any at all, or if a friend, family member, coworker you're close to is experiencing this, please do pass along this podcast to them, or just pass along the information. The information is what's important. We need to get this information out to other people so they can do something before they get the autoimmune issue, before they get the massive IBS or digestive-based issue, right? Or they get cancer. These are all things we want to look at. So let's go over them right now, starting with the first one, which is this. And this one's going to seem the most obvious. When you're living in it, sometimes you never realize it. But in the long term, you're like, oh, I guess I did it. When you look back, you say, I guess that was a factor. But here's the first one. When you find yourself needing caffeine, the black tea, whether it be coffee each morning, or maybe it's sugar. Maybe your thing isn't caffeine, but you reach for sugar when you start to get low energy. Or yours might be neither one of those, but you love pushing yourself hard through exercise because you're tired going in, but you push yourself really hard with a workout, and that gives you a boost. Well, each one of those are actually different stimulants on the body. So they stimulate the body in order to produce energy. But the energy wasn't natural. You gave yourself a stimulant through coffee or through sugar or processed carbs. It might not be straight sugar, but a lot of people don't realize that just doing processed carbs is a very great way, right? Like just look at bread or any one of these things that gives us a temporary boost, a little bit of glucose, but then it leaves us low on the back end. So, and even working out. So I love working out. Don't get me wrong. I recommend more days than not have exercise. The amount of exercise will depend on where you're at right now in your life. And again, please go back to the previous podcast because I do teach these things. Each show I like to give its own topic. And today are the warning signs of adrenal-based fatigue. And the other big part of it is this. When we're talking about this first point, working out can be a stimulant. If you go into a workout exhausted, you're exhausted most days, and you say, I need to get my workout in order to wake up. Well, you could be saying to yourself, I need to get my workout in order to stimulate my body to produce the cortisol to get through the day. So I just want you to look at that because I want you to exercise, but I don't want you to have to exercise to give yourself energy. There's a big difference. It's like another one of those things is I love fasting. I'm a huge advocate of fasting. But I don't want you to have to fast in order to get yourself healthy, in order to lose the weight. I want you to do that and then work with the fasting as well. The same thing with exercise. We're going to exercise. Everyone's going to exercise. For some people, it might be some light walking. For others, we're going to ramp them up a little bit more, right, to some cardio. And then otherwise, we'll get to our interval-based training and our high-intensity interval-based training, resistance training. But what I don't want it to be is a stimulant for you. So that's one thing to look out for. Our number two is this, and it goes along the same lines. But as you start to move towards real adrenal fatigue, and what is adrenal fatigue? Why don't I define that first? adrenal fatigue is kind of being thrown around as, a catch-all term. But, and again, conventional medicine never even gave it its due until maybe 5 or 10 years ago. I had it more than 20 years ago, right? I was diagnosed with Addison's disease just about 20 years ago, last year. Well, what happened was this, is Addison's disease they can diagnose as true adrenal-based issues because your body's no longer producing cortisol. That's a huge issue. I mean, you have brain fog, you have joint pain, you have fevers, you can't control your immune system, you're inflamed with everything that I'm talking about today. But there are levels to this. And just because you're not diagnosed with Addison's disease doesn't mean you can't have some type of adrenal-based fatigue. And what does that mean? Well, it means typically a lower output now of cortisol. And because you have a lower output of cortisol, you're going to feel all of the different symptoms of this today that I'm talking about, these 7 points. And we call this from a medical perspective, and that's why medical perspective, they don't like saying adrenal fatigue. I don't love saying it anymore either, but it's an easy way for people to understand, so I don't see there's no issue with that, right? There's no need to have to throw around big words all the time to make, to have doctors make themselves sound smart or feel smart. But the truth is it's called hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis dysfunction. So hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis dysfunction. What's easier to say? What helps people more? Adrenal fatigue, right? I don't think that we need to always use the term hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis dysfunction, but that's really what it is. And it means that the hypothalamus isn't properly communicating with the pituitary gland, which then isn't properly communicating with your two adrenal-based glands, right? So it means that there's a breakdown in communication through certain hormones that I have explained before, called adrenocorticotropin hormone, corticotropin-releasing hormone, catecholamines, and then we have glucocorticoids. But do we always have to talk in that language? No, because why? Well, that's something I think you do need to learn, right? So as an integrative health practitioner, I teach this in the integrative health practitioner certification. Doctors need to learn this. It's very important to learn it. But when you're working with a wellness client or you're working with a patient as a doctor, your goal is to teach them. It's to instill them, and very, very important to me, education about their own body. They're not going to become a doctor themselves. They're not going to become probably an integrative health practitioner themselves. But this is information that they do need in order to heal their body. So that's why when people say, there's no such thing as adrenal fatigue, well, not the term maybe, but it absolutely is adrenal-based fatigue, right? It's the communication breakdown, the positive negative feedback loop between your brain and the adrenals. So there is absolutely something called adrenal-based fatigue. And I experienced to the fullest degree. And that's an actual diagnosed disease that you can prescribe a medication for called Addison's disease. But again, let's not confuse the actual term with the real world symptoms. And that's what we're going through today. So the second symptom is this, is morning fatigue followed by people becoming a night owl. I've spoken about this before. But being a night owl, some people just enjoy it, right? Because they get that second wind, they get that boost later at night. They say they do their best work then. And I've explained this before, but that is not part of our diphasic nature as humans. We're meant to go to bed with the darkness and wake up with the light. I've explained this many times on previous shows. I don't want to keep going back and saying that. But if you don't know about that, if you don't know about those terms, believe me, go back in the previous shows. I explained that about how the normal diurnal rhythm of melatonin and cortisol work, how if you were to be put outside in a tent in the natural light and not have all these blue lights at night, your body would go back to its natural diurnal rhythm. On a lab test, yes, you could absolutely show higher cortisol at night, but that's an actual dysfunction. That is an actual dysfunction of the body that needs to be corrected. So what happens is people become a night owl also because they have lower morning cortisol. It's one of the hallmarks of adrenal-based fatigue is if you run an adrenal hormone test, you actually start to see low morning cortisol, below a 7 on the lab test that we run. And that shows that your body is no longer able to keep up, right? It can't keep up any longer. So what happens is it starts to produce less cortisol, and we see that as morning cortisol because morning cortisol is supposed to peak between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m., and we miss that, right? On a lab test, people miss that first spike. It's still there. They're still producing cortisol, but not to the degree that it should. And again, they're getting cortisol a little later in the day, and that's what we call tired and wired. They're tired in the morning, and then wired at bedtime. And why is that? Well, that is a hallmark sign of adrenal-based fatigue, of adrenal dysfunction, of that HPA axis dysfunction. Really important to keep that in mind. Number 3 is this: losing interest in things that you used to enjoy. So all of these things really ring a bell with me. I go back, I listen to all of them. Like, again, my friends from high school are some of my best friends still, to this day. And a lot of times what happened with me is that through high school and college, even though I wanted to participate, I didn't want to miss out. My body did not have the energy that I needed to be able to keep up with what I wanted to do. I lost a lot of interest in even, thinking about like, what does it really matter what I major in college? What does it really matter? Because my body and brain had less energy. My body and brain were essentially saying, we don't want to do anything extra because we don't have enough energy to even meet normal human physiological based demands. So why would I want to think about the next trip, the next travel, what I'm going to do with the rest of my life, right? None of those things mattered too much because I did not have the physical and mental energy, which is called ATP, right? Adenosine triphosphate. I spoke a little bit about that last week as well. I didn't have the natural energy to be able to have the vigor, the vitality in life, which I talk so much about, to want to go out and do. And that's why, again, the tagline of the Cabral concept is change your body, change your life. Because I'll tell you right now, you could have gave me all the motivational tapes and things in the world, and I was listening to them. But it didn't matter too much because I literally did not have the juice, the electricity of my body to take my life where I wanted it to go. I had to fix that first. I had to work on my mind, yes, but I had to fix the body as well. So the lower mood and the anxiety, that all comes along with not having enough energy for your body and brain to move forward. Number 4 is this: decreased endurance, decreased stamina, decreased overall strength. So for me, I shared it before, I played a sport every single season in high school, right? And things went well. I did well until my senior year when I got hit, right? My late fall hit with that dis-ease of my body that no doctor could figure out, or my immune system started to shut down. I obviously had to shut down. I left school. But when I came back in the spring, I tried to get back into track. And it was one of the I did track and field. I threw javelin and I ran the 4x4 400 relay and I ran the half mile. And talk about a shot to the ego. I used to be one of the top people on the team. I was one of the worst people on the team. I literally tried my best, but my legs would not move. It was like literally running with lead legs. I'm going back right now and I'm visualizing it. I can feel myself in that scenario and my coach being extremely disappointed in me, thinking I wasn't trying hard enough. I hadn't practiced in the off season. Because the coach's job is to perform, right? They have to win some of these meets and they have to do well or they're going to be fired. And I couldn't compete at a high level anymore. I wanted to. I desperately wanted to. I ran and I sprinted, but I was just losing gas after like 10 seconds, 15 seconds. And now I look back on it and I could see, well, yes, but that's because my mitochondria were failing. They didn't have the ability to actually produce this thing called adenosine triphosphate. They didn't have the raw material. They didn't have the B vitamins. They didn't have the B12, the niacin. They weren't getting proper oxygen or glucose. My cell membranes weren't strong enough. All of these things were the culprits. But I didn't know. I just thought I couldn't figure it out because how would I have known, right? I'm a senior in high school. Sure, I took biology, right? But what's that going to teach me? Nothing about adrenal fatigue. Certainly nothing about where I was at. So I had to leave the team. And that was a real downfall in my mental health as well. Being extremely sick senior year, losing 20 pounds of muscle, becoming extremely, extremely thin, not being able to perform in any sports. It was debilitating in both body and mind, right? But that stubborn, pitter-based mindset of mine, I would get knocked down and I would stay down for a little while. But I would say, okay, this time's going to be different. And I would try and I would feel and I would try and I would feel, but I would begin to read books and books on adrenal fatigue. Because I would just look up, why am I so fatigued? Why am I so tired? Again, there was no internet back then, right? So I'm not looking online. But what I'm doing is I'm going to the library, right? I'm finding bookstores. I'm finding places that I can read on these things, and I would buy them all. And that was a real turning point for me, is that I wasn't alone. So when I share symptoms like this, it's because I want you to know that you're not alone, that this is a real thing, that this is adrenal-based fatigue. And you have to understand it is a real thing. Whether your doctor believes you or says that it's a real thing or not, it doesn't matter. It's not up to your physician to tell you what you have and what your symptoms are. My goal for you is to understand that this is a real thing, that these are real symptoms that you're experiencing, and that no one can take that away from you. This is your life. Now, here's the thing, though. I don't want you to dwell on it, and I also don't want you to be a victim to it, because I know how bad it can feel, but I need you to understand as well that this can be overcome. But the first part of that is recognizing it. Okay, the fifth one is this, is a weakness or fatigue with standing or for long periods of time, or even long conversations. So this is a big one. A lot of people that I work with have POTS. And again, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, right? So another big word that we can just use and throw around in the medical field, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. Well, what does it mean? Well, it basically means low cardiac output. And I've explained it before on many, many times on the podcast. And it has to do with electrolyte imbalance. It also has to do with a decreased output of ATP, specifically in the cardiac muscle tissue. But again, your PCP and MD is probably not going to share that with you because it's not something they've studied and it's not taught in medical school. So where is it taught? Well, it's taught by doctors all around the world that practice naturopathic medicine and functional medicine because they've seen this in their practice. And you go back to the pathophysiology of disease. And then you help people get well. And you say, I can help them get well by restoring their electrolyte balance that I can run on a hair tissue mineral analysis. And then I also looked at their adrenals that I ran on adrenal or thyroid adrenal hormone test or adrenal hormone test. And I also improved their ATP over time with good B vitamins and coenzyme Q10 or ubiquinol and all these other things. And again, that's just part of it. You need to restore the systems of the body. So what I'm telling you is this, though, it's a real thing. As you start to get lightheaded upon standing, that can be an issue with a lack of output of, cardiac strength because you need your body's weak. So the heart can't pump that blood through your body as well. That's what your heart does, right? It's a pump. So you have to understand your heart is a pump. And if it's weak, it can't pump the blood as well from the gastroc, the calves, back up to the heart. Another part is that a lack of output in what's called aldosterone. And that's a hormone that gets produced by the HPA axis when the body is under stress. Now, normal stress, your body has to produce normal stress on a daily basis just to get you through life. And so that's a big one as well. So, and then what does that do? Well, aldosterone, not to get too complicated, tells your kidneys whether to hold on to sodium or to dump sodium and spare potassium. So in an ideal world, you're keeping a balance between sodium and potassium. Sodium being the extracellular fluid in the blood or electrolyte or mineral in the blood, and potassium being more of the intracellular inside. And that helps with what's called cell osmosis that can allow nutrients into the cell. Well, where are the mitochondria? They're in the cell, right? The mitochondria that produces the ATP is in the cell. So if you don't have proper sodium, you can give somebody all the PQQ, you can give them the B3, you can give them the B12, you can give them magnesium, but you need proper cell osmosis. I'll teach more about that in the future, but that goes deep into bioregulatory medicine. That goes even far beyond naturopathic medicine. And that's why when you truly look at all of this, you have to be integrative. You have to love the health field so much that you say, no one version of medicine has all the answers. What I need to do is look at all of the practices and understand that there's beauty and wisdom in all of them. So I want you to understand when you look at that, when I say, I get a little tired upon standing, or, I'll be at a party for a while and I just get tired from standing. Well, that is a first sign, too, that the body's weak, the heart's weak, the cardiovascular system is weak. And then that shows good first signs, or at least oncoming signs of adrenal-based fatigue. The sixth one is this, and I see this all the time. People in this Vata-based state, right? Doesn't mean that they're a Vata body type, but they're in a Vata-based mindset, Vata state, which we so are in the Western-based societies, is people are overwhelmed by noise. They're overwhelmed by lights or scents or heat and cold and everyday stress. So if you can't handle, literally you start to break down when you hear kids yelling or, a lot of arguing or noise or the bright lights or loud noises in a restaurant. Now, you don't have to like them. I don't like any of those things. Trust me. I don't. But I don't get overwhelmed by them. And that's more of the topic that I want to share with you. You don't have to like them. What I'm talking about is, let's say I'm in a room and it's very, very hot. Well, what happens is this. I'm going to be hot. It's not like I'm not human. But what I can do is I can better calm my body down and regulate my body because it's not as overwhelming to my system. But when you're exposed to cold or you're exposed to heat and you can't stay balanced, the balance in your body shows a lack of energy. Remember, your body needs energy for all of the systems of your body. That includes digestion, that includes exercise, that includes literally everything you do, right? Cognitive performance. Everything takes energy. Some things burn more fat than others. Some things burn more glucose than others. It's why we need both carbs and fats, right? We need protein for rebuilding the body. So that's always why I preach balance, is because that's what the body needs. Your brain would much prefer to run on glucose. That doesn't mean you should eat sugar all day, but it means that you need some glycogen in your system. You could also make the argument, well, it does really well on ketones. Well, it will only use ketones if it has to, because your brain can't shut down. So from an evolutionary standpoint, our body does great at surviving, but that doesn't mean it's thriving as well. So really, really important. The next one and the last one is this, is that after a while, when your body has become more fatigued and you really are moving into that adrenal fatigue-based state, your normal recovery is going to be challenged. And by that, I mean this. You'll have an intolerance to exercise, to going out late at night, to drinking alcohol, to having an argument with a friend or a family member, spouse. You can have an intolerance to stress in general, the stresses of daily life. And you'll have an intolerance to travel, meaning that you don't do well on flights and you don't do well traveling to different time zones. All of this shows that your body is slowly beginning to break down and become more fatigued. Now, this happens with everyone with age, but how quickly it happens and at what age makes the biggest difference. I'm a believer now, because I've seen myself recover and I've seen thousands and thousands of other people recover, that it does not have to be an age-related issue. That, yes, you're probably not going to have the stamina of an 18-year-old when you're 80. But I know 80-year-olds right now in my practice, and they have plenty of stamina, and most of them look a lot better than a lot of the 40-year-olds in my practice. And the reason is that they've learned and begun to recognize all the things that are energy draining and those things that are energy giving. So again, I've spoken about those on previous shows as well. It has to do with, do you allow your body to recover? Do you work on this thing called the parasympathetic nervous system? Do you engage in more parasympathetic nervous system activities rather than overstimulating your body? So on this last point, the seventh point, the way that I knew that something was really wrong with my body is that I could no longer keep up. I share with you my track story, right? Well, if I tried to exercise, this even went in college, because I used to play a lot of basketball. When I would play basketball, just pick up basketball with my friends in college, I realized I couldn't do it anymore. What happened was the next day after playing just a 45-minute game of basketball or so, I had flu-like symptoms. My joints hurt. I had cold body temperature, somewhere in the 96s, and I had swollen glands. My immune system would actually start to shut down. And the reason is, again, very straightforward. I pushed myself so hard into that sympathetic nervous system that I moved myself away from the parasympathetic and the healing-based state. And it also exhausted what little reserves I had. So again, secretory IgA levels went down, cortisol levels were totally depleted. This was a sad reality in my life at that time. But I needed to give a lot of those things up in order to recover. So what I did was, for a certain period of time, I had to give up playing basketball with my friends. I had to give up some of those things. Now, I got to keep some because it was kind of a compromise, right? I knew the level to what I could do while still trying to repair. How did I learn that? Essentially through trial and error, because I didn't have any of these teachings back then. I was in my early 20s. No one had taught me any of this. This was in its infancy about 20 years ago, right? So now we have this wisdom, we have this teaching, and that's just what I'm trying to now share with you. I've read about it through many thousands of books. I learned about it all over the world and from many great mentors that I've had. And it's my job to now pass it on to you. And hopefully you will share this information with others. My goal for you is, if possible, I would love for you to test what level you're at in terms of adrenal-based energy. And you can do that with a simple adrenal hormone-based test. It's a saliva test that you can do right at home. It's the very first test that I did that led me to later figuring out that I had Addison's disease. And once I figured it out, well, then I was able to truly work on something. And if you're struggling with weight loss or you're struggling with thyroid issues in general, then I can't recommend enough the thyroid adrenal hormone test, which just is an add-on for all of your adrenal numbers. Plus, you get your progesterone, your estrogen, DHEA, testosterone, plus you get all of your thyroid numbers, and you also get your vitamin D and blood sugar-based levels as well in terms of insulin and hemoglobin A1C. So that's where I started. I also did the hair tissue mineral analysis. I'm a huge advocate of that test as well. I love both because the hair tissue mineral analysis will give you electrolytes, which is so important. And then it will also give you heavy metals and other minerals in general. If you say, you know what, I'd rather not do any lab testing, but I want to give my adrenals a little bit more nutrition, a little bit more nourishment, I would recommend just going back and listen to a previous podcast. It was episode 832. So you can just go to stevencabral.com/832, and it will teach you about the different adrenal adaptogens that will give you energy naturally. Again, it will support your body as you're healing, and some that will also decrease anxiety and stress and allow you to sleep better at night. That one being the Adrenal Soothe, and the former being the Adrenal Energy Support. But again, always get the information behind it. Always know the why. And so again, you can go back to episode 832 on that one. I will link up the adrenal hormone test, the hair tissue mineral analysis, the thyroid adrenal hormone. If that's something that you might be interested in, of course, you're welcome to do that. If not, you have the education right now, right? So you have the understanding that these symptoms are leading you down a path that unless you start to rejuvenate the body, you do all of the things that I spoke about in the rain barrel effect, the de-stress protocol, that is the way to get back on track, right? That is the way, and we can't ignore it. So that was the whole point of today's topic, is I don't want you to ignore these signs. They're not going to go away on their own, but the good news is this, is that you can rebalance your body, and you will, just with some simple lifestyle-based modifications and getting yourself back on track. So hopefully this was helpful today. I do appreciate you tuning in as always. Thank you so much, and if this was helpful, please do feel free to share it with anyone else it could serve. Are you ready to heal yourself and then go on to heal others? If so, the Integrative Health Practitioner Institute can help you discover proven functional medicine protocols that blend the best of 7 different healing disciplines from around the world. I personally share with you the exact handouts and protocols I use in my private practice that enable people to get well, lose the weight, and live longer, stronger. I want to pass this information on to the next generation of health coaches, and that is exactly why I created IHP. We are the future of the health coaching industry, and the skills and knowledge you will learn will make you an in-demand certified health coach anywhere in the world. Although we have many medical professionals taking the IHP certifications, no experience is necessary, and half our members have no previous health certifications. At the Integrative Health Practitioner Institute, our motto is a health coach in every home. Our goal is that you take this knowledge and then share it with family, friends, loved ones, your community, or in a practice where you create a career you love and can be proud of. The global IHP community is filled with some of the most kind and caring people in the world, and we can't wait to welcome you into our world soon. For more information or to set up a discovery call with one of our IHP Health Coach graduates, simply head over to integrativehealthpractitioner.org.